Over the past 20 years, we have substantially expanded the size of our student body, increasing diversity in several important ways, reaffirming our commitment to international learning and exchange and our rejection of the claustrophobic forces of nationalism, racism, and chauvinism.
I came onto UChicago's campus a little bit earlier than most of my peers because I applied for and got into this early start program that was meant to help bridge the divide for troubled youths who would maybe not be super accustomed to the rigorous and affluent UChicago environment. And it was amazing. I loved it. But I remember the first day there, I went on a tour with a few of the other people who were in the program of the Reg, the library here. And it was very nice. We were walking around Mansueto. We went to A-level. And then the woman who was showing us around took us up to the third floor. And we stopped. She was telling us a little bit about it. And she said, yeah, this floor is a little bit different than A. You can't be loud up here. You also can't eat up here. So make sure not to bring any of your fried chicken or grape soda. Fuck. And she said, oh, God. She said this to a group of fly students, mind you. So, like, the poor brown ones. And I remember looking around just to make sure that everyone else had heard what I heard and locking eyes with people who were just as confused as I was. And the lady didn't pause for a second. She kept moving because we had places to be. But I just remember being stuck in the moment and being kind of dumbfounded that my first racist experience on campus happened on the same day I moved in and came from an administrator, no less. I at least thought I'd have to wait until I went to, like, a frat party or something to experience my first microaggression here, but I guess not. And I want to point out that this is not the bigotry that I will be talking about in this video, but I still bring it up because I think it's a good introduction to what this campus can be like, and what I assume many campuses can be like. I think it's a good anecdote to break people out of the idea, one that I held until I came here, that highbrow institutions like this, like UChicago, like the Ivies, whatever, are bastions of liberal intellectualism, free of any level of bigotry. No, in fact, we have much worse. But before we jump into it, because this is going to get ugly, if you're uncomfortable with any of these topics, like any of them, please click away now, because we will be discussing all of them in detail. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and meet our first academic, Rachel Fulton Brown. Now, Rachel is a self-described Christian American professor of medieval European history. She is also a fiddler, a fencer, a blogger, and a wife. How cute. A true Renaissance woman. Now, I first heard about Rachel because of her relationship with disgraced former Breitbart editor and avid defender of pedophilia, Milo Yiannopoulos. And now, Rachel would have a few choice words for me because of my description of Milo just now, because according to her, the world is just simply lying about her good friend. She says that Milo would never defend pedophilia, and everyone, conservatives and liberals alike, are just maliciously twisting his words and spreading misinformation. And dedicated truth seeker I am, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and look into it myself. As it turns out, yeah, she was lying. Yeah, he actually did defend it multiple times on multiple different platforms. Here's a few quotes just from one of the podcasts that he went on to openly discuss this topic. I hope they give you a decent understanding of his views. I'm not going to read them because they're gross. If you want to, go ahead and pause, but I would like to get past this section as quickly as possible. And now, you could be thinking to yourself, this is a respected UChicago professor. There's no way she could be defending these statements, and this man, maybe Ms. Brown, decided to support Milo and his beliefs prematurely. Maybe she didn't have a full understanding of what he was saying. Maybe since he made those statements, she's cut ties. And if you thought that, bless your heart, yeah, you'd be wrong. Since then, she's doubled down on her support of Milo and his beliefs, and even started a podcast with him called The Milo Chronicles. If you have some free time, you should check it out. It features many captivating titles, such as Why I Love Milo, For the Love of Milo, What Would Milo Do, Jordan, Milo, and the Bitch Queen, Abbott Milo's School for Thoughts, THOTS, and Everyone Who Hates Me is Ugly. That's... Sorry, that's pretty funny. I mean, sure, she's indirectly calling me ugly, but I can laugh at it. Whatever. I don't think it's funny, though, that an administrator at this school that caters to Minors, mind you. I was neighbors with a 16-year-old last year. It's not funny that this woman who supports these kinds of people with these kinds of views teaches children, or shit, even young adults. And I know you could be saying, well, that's a little bit unfair. She didn't make those statements, and you'd be right, I guess. She didn't. She just avidly supports the man who did. But to be fair, Rachel has done and said plenty of things independent of Milo. In addition to her support of Milo Yiannopoulos and all his endeavors, Ms. Fulton Brown has a rich history of her own. I have to get a little bit more serious for this next part because we have to talk about the Christchurch mosque shooting. Now, for those of you who forgot, the attack was carried out in 2019 by a Christian alt-right white supremacist. He preceded the shooting with the distribution of a 74-page manifesto titled The Great Replacement, which referenced many racist tropes like white genocide, xenophobia, and eugenics. And now, for some reason, this man struck a chord with Rachel, probably because some of his views were a little too reminiscent of her own for comfort, but either way, she felt the need to distance herself. And as a result, on the same day as the shooting, she released a blog post claiming that the attack was a false flag operation, a conspiracy made up by someone to make conservatives look bad. Now, be careful, Rachel. That's reaching dangerously into Alex Jones' Sandy Hook territory, and legally, he's not doing too well at the moment, but you don't really seem to care. No, you have a message, and you need to be heard. It just doesn't make sense. Ultra-conservative Christians have never been violent before, so it had to be somebody else, right? Somebody out there wants a race war. Somebody out there wants Christians to bear the brunt of the blame. Somebody out there is confident that an attack on the right innocents will spark the conflagration if only the right trigger can be pulled. Rachel knows that this was done by somebody, anybody, aside from the actual man who did it. And she refuses to entertain the idea that this man with these views could have carried out such an attack, and she does this, I think, because her friends sound a lot like this guy. And her friends aren't bad people. No, she doesn't know any bad people. Sure, some people who she quotes and often interacts with, like Vox, they have been referred to as misogynists and white supremacists. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are. No, just because Vox, or Theodore in real life, has been quoted saying things such as, the reason women shouldn't vote in a representative democracy is that they are significantly inclined to vote for whomever they would rather fuck. That's why women's suffrage was pushed by the communists, and that's why it's the first plank of the fascist manifesto. Sure, that sounds a little bit sexist, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a white supremacist. African-American men are 500 times more likely to possess a gene variant that is linked to violence and aggression than white men. Oh. Yeah, no, that doesn't sound great. That doesn't sound too good. But don't worry, you guys. Don't worry at all. Rachel makes it very clear that despite statements like that and many others, Theo, Vox, her good friend, is not a white supremacist. Why does she claim that exactly? Well, because he says so. I have no idea what actual white supremacists talk about. I don't know any. And Vox isn't one either, as he has repeatedly said. Wow. Thank you for that incredible deductive reasoning, Rachel. Turns out you can and should take everyone at face value at all times because they're always telling the truth. Apparently, Richard Spencer isn't a white supremacist either. Yeah, sure, the ethno-state thing is a little sketch, but he says he's not, so I guess we have to believe him, and the debate is over! OJ didn't do it, you guys! Why? I think you get it by now. Because he said so. Perfect! Thank you so much, Rachel. I really have gained an incredible amount of knowledge today. Bitchy sarcasm aside, I don't think Rachel's that dumb. I think she knows she's spreading propaganda. I think she knows that the people she engages with are dangerous. And I think she doesn't care. And I think we should care about that. One last point with Rachel, just to add a little cherry on top. She's anti-vax and anti-mask, which is not surprising at all, but I guess it kind of rounds things out, gives you a final helpful idea of the woman. Well, I think we have learned plenty from Rachel today, and she certainly has had a lot of illuminating things to share. But it's time to move on to our next intellectual. And to do that, we're going to hop over the lake to visit our good friends at Northwestern and introduce ourselves to the former chairman of psychology and brave snowflake destroyer, John Michael Bailey. But first, let's take a quick look at what exactly Northwestern and its faculty stand for. Oh, this looks great. Wow. Our community celebrates diversity and fosters inclusion. Diversity isn't always given. That's a fact. Even at a truly global university, so true. So we work diligently every day to ensure that our campus remains a place of inclusion, one in which every student, faculty, and staff member is welcomed wholeheartedly and without reservation into the Northwestern family. Wow. That's so nice. And what's this? Campus inclusion and community. Education, enrichment, and engagement. The Department of Campus Inclusion and Community works with the university community to cultivate inclusive learning environments. This is done through intentional engagement across and within various identities. Yes, amazing. John certainly does love engaging with various identities. But before we talk about his groundbreaking identity studies, I would be remiss if I did not mention that John has happened to have developed a name for himself for more than just his research. Yes, in fact, even after his studies, Mr. Bailey achieved a significant level of public attention for what some have referred to as the fucksaw incident. Now, what's that exactly? Well, the incident refers to a live display in class that John chose to provide for 100 of his undergraduates, in which a naked woman was being stimulated by a sex toy called, you guessed it, the fucksaw. Now, I'm sure you're asking, what is the fucksaw? Please tell me more. And don't worry, I'm here to help. The fucksaw is essentially a dildo strapped to a reciprocating saw, which when turned on will reciprocate. Now, to me, that sounds like a fun Tuesday night, but there were some people in the community who were a little bit less than happy with Mr. Bailey's display. Our main man and president of the university, Morton Shapiro, noted that he was troubled and disappointed by the event, but it technically broke no university policies, so John remained within his position. And while that's a fun story to tell, the real meat of John's bigot status is not this incident. No, John has also stirred up quite a bit of controversy prior to this event in his research, which he shared in a book titled The Man Who Would Be Queen. If you can tell by that title alone, Mr. Bailey happens to be incredibly transphobic. But just to add a cherry on top, he's also biphobic and homophobic. What a fun trio. In reference to his biphobia, until very recently he argued that all women are bisexual, but no men are, and any men who claimed to be were just lying. A take that he has retracted in the recent past, quite possibly because the original study he conducted to support that claim included a non-representative population of 71 men, with only 33 of them actually identifying as bisexual. Now, I'll point this out for those of you who haven't taken a basic research methods course. 33 people is not a sufficient sample size, and it seems like a decade later he realized that. But despite the fact that he ended up changing his mind, it's still a good point to bring up, because just like Rachel's habit of always defending her friends, John has his own habit of making wide-sweeping claims based on little to no solid evidence, and then accusing anyone who disagrees with him of lying. Yeah, really amazing scientific reasoning, John. You can never be wrong if everyone else is just a sensitive lying liberal. Now, if you could guess, John doesn't really make it a habit of responding to the critics of his theories in any productive or substantive ways. Most of the time, he just attempts to mischaracterize legitimate criticism as defensive SJW propaganda. But in addition to the general unrest surrounding the many questionable and unsubstantiated claims made within his book, many were quick to question Bailey's methods, and at least 6 women came forward to report misconduct on his part. Some of the most jarring accusations against Bailey are those describing his sexual relations with a research subject, and then subsequent use of her story in his book, all without knowing she was actually a part of any kind of study. Yeah, very fun, very cool, very tea room trade. Bailey, did the IRB approve of that? Actually, I'm not being fair. These are allegations, and I guess they'll stay allegations forever, because Northwestern refused to investigate them. If you're interested in learning more about these specific allegations and the evidence behind them, or just his studies altogether, I recommend checking out Len Conway's deconstructions of his work. She provides a wealth of information in regards to Bailey's studies and malpractice in multiple different investigative reports. But Luckily enough, John has provided plenty for me to work with outside of just funny stories and accusations. He's been described by some to be a eugenicist and a homophobe, which are completely meritless claims aside from the fact that he's looking for a gay gene, and he also thinks parents should be able to cut it out of their kids. Here's a few quotes of his. This first one's fun. Parents' freedom to have heterosexual children, if they so choose, may be very important to them and would not cause any direct harm to anyone. Yes, oh my goodness, finally somebody said it. Eradicate the gay babies. Thank you, John, for being so brave and saying what needed to be said, because what would make avoiding gay children wrong? You know? I think homosexuality might be the most striking unresolved paradox of human evolution, because homosexuality is evolutionarily maladaptive. Yeah, no, doesn't sound like Nazi shit at all. Everyone who thinks you're a eugenicist is obviously not seeing things clearly. Again, sarcasm aside, other than the blatantly eugenicist and alarming takes that Bailey presents, a lot of his quotes that you'll see if you actually do subject yourself to his work are just blatantly wrong. Like for that last one, homosexuality is evolutionarily maladaptive. That's just not true. This is relatively unimportant, but there's far more evidence for homosexuality being non-adaptive. And as a researcher, Bailey, I don't understand how you don't know that. If it was strictly maladaptive, then we wouldn't see it presented in nearly every mammalian species, and it almost definitely would have been bred out of our population hundreds of thousands of years ago. Ever heard of kin selection, John? Actually, hold up. You probably haven't. You don't seem to be particularly well-read on anything that you talk about in your research. So I guess I won't bog you down with high school level biology. No, at this point, I think it'd be better to just keep moving. And instead, let's finish with Bailey's discussion of trans women, which was the main focus of his scientific book, The Man Who Would Be Queen. In it, Bailey supported a theory first developed by Ray Blanchard in 1989, known as Blanchard's transsexualism typology, in which he categorizes trans women into two groups, autogynephilic and homosexual, both of which he describes as men, but with distinct motivations for medically transitioning to appear feminine. According to him, trans women only transition for one of two reasons. Bailey tells us that autogynephiles do it to experience heightened autosexuality, or attraction to oneself. His reasoning here being that these are straight men who are so narcissistic that they medically transition in order to satiate a fetishistic masturbatory urge. If that sounds absurd, and contrary to the accounts of nearly every trans woman you've ever met, yeah, same. The other option he provides for trans women is what he refers to as a categorization called homosexual transsexuality. And homosexual transsexuals transition specifically to become more appealing to straight men who they had little success in developing relationships with prior to transition. And in the process of transitioning, homosexual transsexuals, as opposed to autogynephilic transsexuals, find themselves positioned to become perfect. Yeah. This book got him tenure. Anyways, this theory does little else aside from perpetuating the damaging trope of the sexually deviant and fetishistic trans woman, in addition to the misconception that they're just gay men intentionally aiming to deceive or trap straight ones. There's nothing novel or impressive about Blanchard's typology or Bailey's support of it. It's literally just two problematic old men in positions of power repeating stereotypes that have been perpetuated for decades. While the theory itself is remarkably shallow and has been deconstructed many times, check out The Case Against Autogynephilia by Julia M. Serrano if you'd like an in-depth takedown. Bailey's studies alone, even if Blanchard's theory was true, are embarrassingly inept. The evidence that Bailey uses to categorically support Blanchard's typology is a small collection of anecdotes he collected while making connections with random women he found at local Chicago gay bars. His book consists of accounts from multiple interactions he had with these various women, and he goes on to use those few individual accounts as some kind of proof to further his claims. But that isn't how research works, John. In order for conclusive claims to be made about a theory, we have to follow this thing that we learned back in middle school called the scientific method. And in order to do that, we have to set up controls and minimize variables and make sure to study a large enough population to yield a statistically representative result. And Bailey doesn't do any of that. In a poor attempt to defend him, Northwestern professor Alice Strager wrote an article in which she pointed out, never did he seek a statistically representative sample of trans women in deciding whose stories to tell. He simply picked people who came with good stories. Yeah, you've done an amazing job at identifying the problem, Alice. I agree with you. There's nothing statistical or scientific about Bailey's work, but that's exactly how his book is presented and described. Based on his original research, Bailey's book is grounded firmly in science. But as he demonstrates, science doesn't always deliver predictable or even comfortable answers. Yeah, Bailey, your science didn't deliver anything. You can't create a book filled with stories cherry-picked from a bunch of poor trans women you found on the streets of Chicago and then call it scientific. That's just bad practice. And worse than John's shoddy research is what he chooses to do with it. He doesn't present any of his poorly compiled findings as a jumping-off point for further research. No, he just uses them to make flat claims that perpetuate bigoted and damaging stereotypes. There is a disgustingly long list of trans people who have been murdered just last year because of the outdated and bigoted beliefs that John's poorly constructed studies support.
And when you do that, John,
when you use snowball-sampled anecdotes and conclusions drawn from tiny, unrepresentative populations to directly harm the exact people you're studying, those people are very reasonably not going to like it. But somehow, within all of this, you've convinced yourself that you're the victim. Did I think that people would devote their lives to trying to ruin me? I did not. I've also never been an advocate of believing things just because it makes people comfortable. Sometimes, when the emperor has no clothes, I'll be the first one to say it. Wow, what a martyr complex on this one. Okay, John, please understand. People aren't angry at you because you're exposing uncomfortable truths. They're angry at you for spreading damaging, unscientific garbage. It's gross. Christ. You know, this one left a particularly bad taste in my mouth. I'm done with Bailey. Let's move back to something that I'm a little bit more used to. And in order to do that, we'll have to leave Chicago behind and visit the best school in the nation, Harvard University. Hi, Karen. Love and miss you. You know what I don't love, though? Racism. And on the surface, Harvard doesn't either. Diversity and access. Embracing our differences. Our students represent all 50 states and more than 100 countries. When they come to Harvard, they bring their talent, curiosity, and intelligence. They also bring their perspective on the world, an understanding that is deeply tied to their culture, background, and experiences. The result is a diverse, open-minded community where dialogue and debate is not only encouraged, they're inevitable. Wow, that sounds kind of familiar. And it also sounds amazing. I love it. And even below here, we can see that they have a statement very clearly in support of Black Lives Matter and very clearly against some of the most recent anti-Asian violence. That's amazing. That's important. Thank you so much, Harvard. And what else is this? Oh my gosh. Diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Harvard is committed to fostering a culture of inclusive excellence. The Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging works to make every student feel like a valued member of the Harvard community. Wow. Great to hear it. Love to see it. Let's go ahead and talk about how instructor David Kane, or as some people refer to him, David Field, is helping to foster that culture of inclusive excellence. Now, Dave is a current preceptor in statistical methods in mathematics for Harvard's Department of Government, but he taught for a few years at Williams College. And this will be relevant soon. He's also the founder of a forum called EPH Blog. Now, Dave did cause a little bit of an uproar when he invited social Darwinist Charles Murray to campus. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mr. Murray happens to be one of the authors of a book titled The Bell Curve, Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life, in which he posits that racial differences and marked levels of intelligence and economic success are based on genetic factors instead of societal ones. A few quotes. The impulse to think that environmental sources of difference are less threatening than genetic ones is natural but illusory. The irony is that as America equalizes the circumstances of people's lives, the remaining differences in intelligence are increasingly determined by differences in genes. Latino and Black immigrants are, at least in the short run, putting some downward pressure on the distribution of intelligence. Yeah, no, I'm sure that has everything to do with race and nothing to do with the fact that most of them are coming from third world countries. Whatever. If some of you are still missing the problem here, let's go ahead and take a second to fix that. If I say intellectual success is solely based on genetics, and then go on to acknowledge the fact that to this day, white Americans maintain academic and career superiority compared to other races, what the fuck am I saying? This is barely different than those 19th century phrenologists who would have justified my enslavement because the diameter of my skull is 3 centimeters too large. Murray is just another academic bigot, using IQ averages and ignoring environmental impediments to make prejudiced and narrow claims. Racism, but with numbers. And Dave wanted him on campus, which, mind you, is worse than Vox Day. All of these people are worse than Theodore. Before I talk more about David, I feel the need to point that out now. They will never hold any kind of serious political power or influence. But these people, the ones I've been talking about, the ones educating our future world leaders, these are the ones with influence. Whether or not they admit it, lay people and even other academics will quietly agree with them because they reinforce bigoted but familiar views and present their studies as if they're based on actual science. Just a few days ago, one of my econ professors directly cited Murray. These people, these academic bigots, bridge the divide between the Vox Days of the world and everyone else. When this kind of pseudoscientific rhetoric is accepted as mainstream consensus, bad things happen. But no. I'm being too alarmist. Dave is right. It's important for students to be exposed to more right-wing perspectives, no matter how meritless or damaging they are. And it was wrong of Harvard's student body to be against that. And, Dave's been exposed to those kind of controversial, albeit merited views, and he's a great guy, so there's nothing to worry about, right? Aside from this little fiasco, Dave got himself into some more hot water last year when many of his own allegedly racist blog posts were brought to light. You see, after the Murray controversy, there were many students who were interested in learning more about Kane, and as a result, many new eyes were combing through EPH blog posts. Now, because of that, according to the Harvard Crimson, a post was found authored by a man named David Dudley Field, but signed David Kane, 88. And interestingly enough, this mysterious man, Davy Field, happened to have made quite a few problematic posts. One from 2018 claimed that over 90% of black students at Williams College would not have been admitted if not for their blackness. And interestingly enough, again, David Kane, not to be confused with David Field, happened to have written an op-ed in 2017 titled, "What Does It Mean to Be the Best?", in which he argued that Williams should admit fewer students from low-income backgrounds and underrepresented minority groups. That sounds kind of similar to what Field was saying. Anyways, more EPH blog posts from Field included a criticism of Williams College for condemning white supremacist groups but not Black Lives Matter, while others just straight up defended white supremacists and neo-Nazis. And now, I would love to be able to show you direct quotes or pictures of these blog posts, but unfortunately, Dave burned all the evidence. So that's not an option. But even still, you can connect the dots. These are allegations in name only, and even ignoring them, the dehumanizing rhetoric that Kane openly supports and attempts to spread is remarkably dangerous. I'm really happy I didn't know about people like this before I came to campus. Like I mentioned, I came a little bit earlier than most of my peers, and I was really lucky for that, because I had a lot of shit to work through. My problems were less focused on getting used to the academics or environment than getting used to myself within both, because I had a lot of hang-ups. And while I was proud of myself for being able to get into schools like this, I was incredibly insecure, and I felt wildly out of place. Despite the fact that I was an exemplary applicant, and I was aware of that, I felt like my admissions officer made some kind of mistake. Like, even when I opened the exception letter, I couldn't be happy. And it sucked. It was so shitty. But worse than, I think, the insecurity was the shame. The guilt I felt. Because half my family lives 15 minutes away outside of Hyde Park's cute little gentrified bubble, where 90% of the student body would never think to step foot, and I'm here on the top floor of some state-of-the-art dorm with a perfect view of a literal castle on the same campus as Bill Gates' son, and who the fuck am I? Melodramatic, I'm aware, but that was the vibe. For a few months. A year, I guess. And I bring that up not because I want to make people who disagree with what I'm trying to say here feel bad. Those of you who will inevitably shout, "Free speech!" Which, free speech can't be violated by a private institution or individual, which is something that some people on this campus don't really seem to understand. Anyways, I brought it up because I know that there are a lot of people who have or will feel the same, and this could maybe be cathartic for them. I also brought it up to point out how Dave would have validated every single one of those feelings. He would have said, "You're right. You don't belong here. Your admissions officer was feeling just a little bit more white guilt than normal and let you slip through the cracks. It was a mistake. You should leave." And if any authority figure, any person had said something like that to me, or if I knew that similar beliefs were supported on this campus, I have no idea how I would have handled it. So I'm lucky I was naive. But I also know that I'm remarkably privileged in many regards, and there are plenty of kids who walk onto this campus with much less than me and a much more accurate understanding of the environment, and I cannot imagine. If I felt as bad as I did, I genuinely cannot imagine how they would feel. And, I look at the retention rate for black students on this campus and how it's 20% lower than average and think maybe that's not because they're naturally inept. Maybe they come to these schools, which claim to want them, already disenfranchised. And then they find themselves in this environment, which in reality for them is at best indifferent or at worst adversarial. And maybe that drives them away. But listen, I get it. Life of the mind. I understand the necessity to delve into topics that are uncomfortable. Nothing is gained in an echo chamber. That's something that I strongly believe. And personally, I like exploring different ideologies. In making this video alone, I had to ingest some disgusting information, but it was kind of fun. Well, I don't like these people. They're extremely interesting. And in the same way, the people they support, the Murrays, the Milos, the Days, whatever, they're interesting too. In part because they're batshit, but also because the ways that they come to form their worldviews are so incredibly different from mine. And that's compelling. I would probably like to talk with all of them and to pick their brains. But I wouldn't want them teaching my classes. Like I said, I was lucky. I was oblivious enough to find a solid footing here before I had to experience any real bigotry, which since then I definitely have. But for all the bad, I recognize that in most instances, I've been treated extremely well here. And I do love many aspects of this school. I'm kind of thriving, 75th percentile. But still, I recognize a deep hypocrisy here, and at Harvard and Northwestern, and every university with the means to create these monsters, one that directly exposes entire student bodies to counterproductive, bigoted lies and stands to harm its most vulnerable populations. And that hypocrisy raises a few good questions. At what point does academic impunity begin to cannibalize academic pursuit? Do the protections of academic freedom cover idiocy and bigotry? How much of both are we willing to tolerate in an attempt to appear neutral? For these institutions, apparently a lot. And if that's the case, you guys really have to start being more honest. Because if you sponsor, fund, and endorse people like this, people who espouse this unquestionably alienating and bigoted rhetoric, while also claiming to have the aim of developing a just community that values diversity and inclusion, you're lying through your fucking teeth.